Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1322. Hey, if you want to download this Excel workbook, Excel Magic Trick 1322 start or the finish file or the access database so you can follow along, click on the link below the video. Wow, we have quite an amazing video here. We're going to look at Excel, DAX, Power Query, and structured query language. Now, I call this video backwards one-to-many relationship report. Now, if you can think of a better name than this, please in the comments let me know. But that is sort of what we're going to try to do. Now, here's the two data sets. This is, in essence, the lookup column, or this is the primary key. We have student ID, the name, and the GPA for some students. And over here, we have an applications table. Now, you notice there's some duplicates because this student, 271, had 4 different applications, 2 to UW in 2 different majors and 2 to WSU in 2 different majors. Now, here's what our end result is. Over here, I need to calculate the average GPA by major. But I do not want to include any duplicates because look at this. We're going to be taking major criteria from this column. But this student right here lists BI twice. Now, normally, that's not a problem when you're doing conditions with criteria. But we need to go from this many side back over to the one side of this relationship and get that 3.75 just once when we're calculating our average over here. So really, this is what, for BI major, this is what the average calculation should look like. Equals average, and this will be the end result, tab. I'm going to look through this. BI, I need 271, so I definitely want that 271. Now, as I go down here, that's a duplicate. This one is not, so I need 311. And I'm going to use the Control key to select 311. Now, I'm going down the list. I see a 541 and a 616. So I'm coming down here, 541, 616. I'm using my Control key. And then it looks like there's one other unique BI student ID, which would be this right here. So notice there's 5 numbers that I need in my calculation over here when I hit Enter. That's what we're trying to get. Now, we would be tempted to do something straight like this. Average ifs. And the average range, well, I need to pick out just some of these. But notice the criteria range for major. Well, right off the bat, these are 2 different sized arrays, so that wouldn't work. Even if it could work, there would still be the problem of duplicates on this side. Now we're going to see 4 solutions over here. We're going to see an Excel formula, Power Pivot, DAX formula, Power Query, and even structured query language. Looking at that will maybe help us kind of understand what Power Query is doing. Now, we're going to start off with the formula, and I'm going to try and build a helper column here to pick out just the grades I want. Now, I'm going to do this column just to help us illustrate how our formula is going to work over here, and I'm going to do it for the BI major. So as I copy this helper formula down, I need to ask the question, is the particular student ID over in this list, and is the major BI? So you ready? I'm not going to use match like we would normally do for comparing 2 lists. I'm going to use count ifs. And the criteria range, well, first I want to check the student ID, so I'm going to highlight the entire range over here. And notice I've already converted these to Excel tables. That's table formula nomenclature. That's the table name. Field name is always in square brackets, comma. And now the criteria, as I copy this down, I want to look at each new student ID, asking the question, is it over in this list? Now, that's the table formula nomenclature for relative cell reference. That @ symbol means always get the record for SID in this row, comma. Criteria range 2, well, just to illustrate, I'm going to highlight the whole column, comma. And then criteria, I'm simply going to put BI. All right, so what this is going to do is see if the student ID is over in this list and their major is BI, close parentheses. Control Enter and copy it down. Now we have something we can work with. Anytime we see a number that's not 0, that's our indicator to pick out this number. Now, let's come over here. and I want to simulate this entire helper column, but only right in this cell. When I come down to some new major, I need to create a different type of array. So to see how this works, let's start in the BI cell. And I'm actually going to use the count ifs again. The criteria range. Well, guess what? It's going to be the entire column here, application student ID, comma, criteria. Remember, just a second ago, we selected a single student ID, but I need them all, so I'm going to highlight the entire column. Notice, now in criteria 1, instead of a single item, there's 12 student IDs. That instructs countifs to spit out 12 answers. This is called a function argument array operation. We're forcing countifs to give us 12 answers. Now I type comma, highlight, major column. There it is, applications majors, comma, and there's the condition or criteria. Close parentheses. And now my cursor's at the end, so I'll hit F9. And there it is. We have simulated that helper column in this cell. Now this resultant array is going to be perfect if we use it in the if function to pick out just the GPAs I want. And the reason why it's perfect is because if interprets any non-zero number as true and 0 as false. So Control Z. Now I simply put the if in front. The logical test, there's our trues and falses, comma, value of true. Remember, I'm in essence trying to filter these GPAs just for the ones I want. That will work. I'm going to leave the false out. If I leave that out, falses will be inserted into the resultant array. Close parentheses. Now with the cursor at the end, let's hit F9, and there we go. There's our filtered list just for BI. Control Z. I'm going to copy it down one here just to put it into edit mode, and F9 just to see that this filtered list is working. Yes, there's only one major for database management. And there it is, the 2.9. Now I'm going to click Escape. Let's come over and finish this. Now that's the filtered list. And what is my goal? I'm using the aggregate calculation average tab. Come to the end, close parentheses. Now this formula is an array formula, and it will require Control-Shift-Enter. There's a bunch of array calculations here, and none of the arguments can handle these array operations unless we use the special keystroke, Control-Shift, and Enter. There's our correct answer. Immediately when you use Control-Shift-Enter, go up to the formula bar and verify that those curly brackets are there. That's Excel telling you it understood that this is supposed to be calculated as an array formula. Now I'm going to copy it down and then up one. Go to the last cell in F2. That is amazing. Somehow we went from criteria in this table and went and picked out numbers over in this table. Now, that's the first way. That's a formula. And actually, there's another possible way over here. You can look if you want. I think it's definitely not as efficient as this one for formulas. But now, let's think about pivot tables. And a pivot table is definitely going to have a hard time. I have no idea how to do it with a straight pivot table. But I'm thinking that we can do it with Power Pivot and DAX formulas. Now, there's a relationship between this. This is a one-to-many relationships. Now, I happen to have Power Pivot, but I'm going to show you how to access the data model, relationships, and DAX formulas without having Power Pivot. That means if you have Excel 2016, we can do this. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build a relationship without Power Pivot, because look at this, 2016 Excel data ribbon. There it is. Now, these are already Excel tables, which is required. So when I click Relationships, here's the Relationships dialog box. I click New. Now, when you see this, sometimes it's confusing, especially for Excel people. Just remember, this is like a lookup table with a unique identifier in the first column. Well, the unique identifier in databasing is called the primary key. So that's always the hint to remind me this is the lookup table. So I'm going to say students. That's the name of this table over here. And we're looking at SID. Now, applications. And then the foreign key will be SID. Now, the cool thing about using create relationships is that not only will it create the relationship, but as soon as I click OK, it'll add these tables to the data model, even if I don't have the right version of Excel 2016 that lets me use the Power Pivot user interface. So when I click OK, this is going to be amazing. Now, if you don't have Power Pivot, you can't go and look. But it is there. I have Power Pivot, so I can go and look. If I click on Power Pivot Manage, there are our two tables. If I go to Diagram View, there is the one from the student ID to many relationship. This allows us to pull fields from both tables in one pivot table. Now I'm going to close that. Again, it will work if you don't have Power Pivot. Now I can click in either table and insert a regular pivot table, or I can use the keyboard Alt and V. And look at this. Because we have something in the data model, we say, use this workbook's data model. That is so cool. Again, all without Power Pivot. Location, I'm going to try and put it in L19. Click OK. Now, one of the strange and unusual things about what we're trying to do here is this is the many side, this is the one side. Something very strange happens if you use criteria from the many side and try and pull a number from the one side. This is something, I don't know if I've even seen a report requirement like this. But let's just do a little experiment. I'm going to come up, open applications and students. By the way, you can tell these are in the data model because of that little black line there. Let's just drag student ID. This is an experiment down to rows. And then let's drag GPA. Now notice both fields are from the same table, the one side, right? So we get a unique list here, and it tries to show these. Now I'm going to right-click and change it to summarize values by average. Even though this is kind of silly, this is the one, so it's only pulling one, it'll illustrate something important. This SID came from the one side. If I drag this off and drag it from the many side, the pivot table will not know what to do with this. In essence, that number is the average of all of the numbers. So we get the same thing. We get the same thing all the way through. Now, DAX will allow us to build a formula inside this pivot table to go backwards. Again, this is a very unusual calculation. Now, let me illustrate this one other way, because student ID was just convenient because it was in both tables. What we really want is major. So I'm going to drag major from applications down here. But of course, we get exactly the same problem. It doesn't know what to do going backwards through this relationship. Now I'm going to drag this off. This is called an implicit calculation. I'm using summarize values by built-in function in a pivot table. I'm going to drag this off. I'm going to build an explicit, meaning using the actual DAX average based on this GPA column over here. Now, if you don't have Power Pivot, no problem. In 2016, you right-click and add a measure. Now, a measure in 2013, Excel was called Calculated Field. In 2010, before that, it was called Measure, but now they call it Measure. Our measure name, I'm going to call it Average GPA. And I'm simply going to use the average function. And here's our list of table names and field names. I'm going to down arrow to get students, table, GPA field, close parentheses. I'm not going to add any number formatting, but I could. That's a big advantage for DAX formulas. Click OK. Now I come up to the refresh table, and look at that. Something else new in 2016. It says f of x to let us know this is a measure. I'm going to drag it down to values. The exact same problem is going to happen. But we're going to further build our DAX formula to alter the filter context. Because two things need to happen in this calculation in each cell. The actual criteria from the row label needs to flow into our DAX formula, so we know the actual major. And the formula is also going to be comparing, because there's a relationship between these two columns, asking the question, is the student ID and applications over in our students table? All right, let's come over here to students. Right-click, add measure. This will be our second DAX formula. The name is going to be average GPA correct. Now, we're going to need to iterate over this table just as we did here because we need to pick out the right GPA number for each major and not include any duplicates. Now, iterating over a table in a measure requires special iterative functions, the x functions like SUMX, COUNTX. We're going to use average x, which will allow us to iterate over that table. Now, the table we're going to be working on is students. So I type students or use my drop-down tab. Now, comma, the expression, well, we need to alter. If we look down here right now, we have that measure that we created for average. We need to alter that. And so the way you alter filter context is to use the most amazing function, calculate. Now, calculate requires an expression which is an aggregate calculation, and we already did ours. Now, when you're building DAX, if it's a table, you use the table name. If it's a column, you use table and in square brackets the column name. If you're doing a measure, you use square brackets only. So I'm going to use average GPA. That's our calculation, which is down in our pivot table right now, not working. Calculate will allow us to change that filter context. Now I type a comma, and we build a filter. Now we're going to be comparing column from SID applications and back over in our students table. And we can't do that directly without using the filter function. Now, filter function is also an iterative function. It will work over the particular table you give it. So in the first argument table, I'm going to use applications because I need to iterate over this and compare student ID, comma. Now, our filter expressions, I want to look at applications student ID. So I put that entire column in. And then I'm going to say, are any of you equal to? And I would like to go and get student's ID, but I can't do that. That's in a different table. Notice we're working on the applications, and I need to get back to the students table. So the way you do that is with the earlier function. And you can read it right here. It tells you returns the value in the column prior to the specified number of table scans. We are scanning over applications, and I need to get back to students. So I use earlier. Now I can simply select that student's ID, and that will work. This little construction, application student ID equals earlier student ID, will work. Now that filter right there is comparing the two lists of student IDs. Because we're in Calculate, it'll allow the major criteria to flow in. All we have to do is close off this, close off average, and that formula will do it. I'm not going to add any number formatting to this one either. I'm simply going to click OK. Now, come up, open up students, and there's our second measure we've created. I'm going to drag it down here, and you got to be kidding me. Look at that. Exactly the same numbers as we got up here. Now I'm going to change that row labels. Design, report layout, show in tabular. So we can do it with Excel formulas. We can even do it with DAX. Now let's see our third method. That's going to be Power Query. Now in Power Query, we will be able to connect both tables and actually merge them. So we get, for this record right here, we'll actually have 4 records with all the data from this table also. Then we will remove duplicates. And we will, in essence, have a table that we can use the group by feature to calculate average for each major. Now, in order to use Power Query, both of these have to be tables. These are both tables, so I click in a single cell. Now I'm going to merge them, so I first have to add both of them, data from table, or we can use the keyboard Alt-A-P-T. There's the table, there's the name. All we're going to do is close and load to. Only a connection. I'm loading them into Power Query so that I can merge them. We can see over here, there it's been loaded as a connection only. I click in a single cell, Alt-A-P-T, to add it from Excel as a table. There's our name over here. There's our table. Close and load to. Only a connection load. There's our 2 tables. Now we come up to New Query. combine, and we are going to merge. Now, merging is sort of like doing a VLOOKUP or a relationship between tables or a join. I'm going to select students first. This is the one side. That's the student ID. Select applications. This is the many side. Now we have to join this as an inner join, only matching the rows. This, in essence, will make sure that we do not get any students that are not in the applications table. Now when I click OK, Power Query gives us the first table, and there's a table over here with that has the actual 4 records for this particular student from the applications table. So let's click the expand button. I want to uncheck these so I can get these field names. Click OK. And there it is. That's the 2 tables merge. 271 is repeated 4 times. There's our BI and BI for WSU and UW. Now I'm going to move the columns around. I want major as the first one. Then I want GPA. We're going to need student ID to help us remove duplicates, but we don't need any of these other ones. So I'm going to highlight major, hold shift, click on SID, right click, remove other columns. Now click major all the way to SID, and now we need to remove duplicates because look, BI, there's 1 grade point average for 271. But that is a duplicate, and if we included those in our calculations, we'd get the incorrect answer. So now we can come up and remove duplicates. Sometimes if you don't see it, it'll be under this one, remove duplicates. So I'm going to click remove duplicates. That is looking amazing. Now notice in Power Query, we actually created the actual data set. Over in Excel with formulas and Power Pivot DAX, we didn't actually create this data set. We actually used formulas to do it. This Power Query table will be similar to structured query language where you actually pull. We're going to pull this table. Hey, now guess what? We can get rid of student ID. We've used it to remove duplicates. I don't need it anymore. It's not in the final report, so I remove, right-click, remove. Now, guess what? We can use the group by feature. Here it is right here. Group by, you see it in Access or structured query language, and here in Power Query. Over in Excel, we would think of this as a type of countifs or average ifs. What group by will do is that it'll actually group all the BIs together just for a second, and then it will do some aggregate calculation over here. For us, we're going to be averaging the GPAs. But group by specifically will spit out a result that gives us a unique list here and some aggregate calculation on this column. Ready? Group by. I definitely am going to group by major. I'm going to call this average GPA. Click the operations, and we want average. Which column do we want to work that aggregate calculation on? GPA. And when we click OK, there is almost exactly what we want. We have one last step. We need to sort this. I'm going to click A to Z. And you've got to be kidding me. Look at that using Power Query. We have calculated average GPA by major, not including duplicates. Now let's close and load to. Actually, I can already see I made a mistake. We'll have to fix it later. I forgot to name that. I'm going to click Existing, click the Collapse button. And I want to try and put this in cell L30. Click OK. Now I can click Load. And look at that. That is absolutely beautiful. The same numbers, 3 different ways. Now I'm going to come over here, right-click, Properties. And we can change the name. That is a terrible name. Something like average GPA by major. Click OK. All right, now let's go over, and I'm going to open up the Access database that you can download. OK, so over in Access, and by the way, there's structured query language works in every database that exists. And I'm just using Access because that's what I have on my computer. But we can look. There's the same table. It does have a unique identifier here. And there's the lookup table or our students table. All right, I'm going to close both of these, go over to Create, Query in Design. I'm going to click Escape to close that show table, and then I'm going to click on the SQL button. Now, The way it works in SQL is we're going to have a select statement to, from those two tables, select all of the columns and records from the tables we want. Now, select is always followed by your columns. So I'm going to say, please give me major. And then if you want more than one, you type a comma. Major and GPA, comma. And then we do want student ID, but that column is in both tables. So I have to specify the actual table name, students, and then a dot, not square brackets, but a dot. So that'll pull columns. Select is always followed by your columns. Select from, and now you tell it which tables. We want students. But we have two tables. So we hit enter and we use join. Now in many structured query languages, join would work. Over here in Access, I have to put inner join. Now notice in Power Query, we had to join to and do an inner join. But now inner join on applications. And we need to tell it which column. So you use on to tell it which column should be connected. This is like doing a VLOOKUP in Excel or relationships in Power Query data model. You say on students. Now this is my downfall. I'm a terrible typer, so I usually get it wrong. Students.SID, you must be equal to applications.studentID. Now let's just go look and see what this will look like. It should merge the two tables. I'm going to click View, and there are our records. But now notice BI 271, BI 271. So there would be two numbers from the same student, and we don't want that. So we go back underneath, Structured Query Language. Hey, guess what? We can, instead of remove duplicates, we can say select distinct. And that will give us a distinct or unique list. Now when I click View, there are just one instant of each BI and each student's grades. Now this is sort of like the Power Query, right? We actually created the table first, and then we do a group by calculation. Now this is a brand new table that we created from applications and students. So we're going to go underneath and treat it as a table and give it a new name. So go back under to Structured Query Language. I'm actually going to put this in parentheses because this is going to be a sub-query that we have. And I'm going to name it. And we do that with as. And we're just going to give it the name B because this table's underneath just for us to use. Now we can select columns and do an aggregate calculation and group by on that new table. So now our new select. Hey, we want major, but we actually can't just use major because now applications has major, and so does this new table B. So we have to specify which one, B dot. There's our select with a column. We type a comma, and now we make our aggregate calculation after the select statement. AVG is the aggregate calculation for average. And open parentheses, we're going to say, hey, please do it on GPA, but we're going to have the same problem. We need the distinct list from this new B table, so we B dot. Close parentheses, and I want to name this one, so we say as, and we'll call this column average GPA. Enter. We always have our table come after from, so we're selecting these columns, including that new aggregation, from all of that. Now we can come down after the table before the semicolon, because the semicolon ends the code we write here. And now we do group by. And we say B dot major. Now let's go look at this. So now we know the group by. We see it here in Structured Query Language. We see it over in Power Query. If I click View, there it is, our group by calculation. A unique list here with our aggregate calculation for each one of those groups. Now we're going to come back underneath, and there is our language. If it didn't sort correctly, we would enter and then do order by, which is our method of sorting. Order by B dot major. But it looked like it sorted just fine. We could check it. It's going to give us the same thing. Go back up underneath. Hey, I'm going to Control S because I want to give this a smart name. Average GPA major. Click OK. We can go look at it. There it is. So how did we do this? We did this amazing average GPA without duplicates by major. We did it with SQL over in Excel. We did it with Power Query. We also did it using DAX formulas and a pivot table. And we started it off with an array formula over in Excel. Wow, that was a wild one. All right, we'll see you next video.